Welcome to Monday Morning Coffee with Inside the Firm. Each week, our hosts will be interviewing local, regional, and national business leaders to give you an inside peek into how they lead their business to success in the ever-competitive business climate.
Welcome to another episode of Inside the Firm. This is our Monday Morning Coffee edition. I am your host, Alex Gore. I am here, and the briefest introduction I will ever give, but that's all this man needs. It's Patrick MacLeamy. He is the former CEO of HOK and wrote an awesome book that we will talk about. Welcome Inside the Firm.
Thank you very much, Alex. It's great to be here, actually.
Yeah.
And I'm really interested in your audience, especially if they're young people, well, any age, but I guess anybody who really wants to learn how to practice or how to improve their practice, I'm interested in.
Well,
that's partly why the book was written. So please go ahead.
And that's why I had you back on, is because the first time I didn't read the book. And then the book is Designing a World-Class Architectural Firm, and it's the people, stories, and strategies behind it. Our firm is probably, you'd classify it as small, 9 to 11. So a small architecture firm. I read it. I could not stop telling my business partner to read it. He read it, and he can't read books. He can only do Audible. He actually read this, and he loves it so much that so we have a weekly show on Friday. At the end of the chapter, we go through a chapter and we pick out one or two of the pieces of advice and talk about it. So if I would, this is honestly one of my favorite books, and I put it up there with Steve Jobs, Walter Isaacson. I loved. If you've ever read Sam Walton, I think by himself, I think it's Made in America. Amazing book. And what I'm trying to say is, one, to congratulate you. It is written that well. It is written that well that it is at the level, but then it's in architecture, my industry. So it just went to another level. So I cannot thank you enough. And I want to ask you, why did you write this? Because it is so in depth. It is so behind the scenes. It is failures. It is successes. It's everything. Why did you write this book?
Well, okay, that's a very good question. Well, first, Alex, when I was a young man, still in high school, I had an interest in architecture, but I grew up in a small industrial town in the Midwest, and there were no architects in town. So I had some idea about what architects did, but not really. And there was an architect nearby in a larger town. And so I just called him and introduced myself and said, could I please just visit your office and ask you a few questions? I'm considering studying architecture at college. And he turned me down flat. Basically, I don't have time for you, kid. I'm busy.
Yep.
And that really hurt. And so over the years, I resolved, I found my way anyway to university. I graduated in architecture and spent an entire career at HOK. And one of the things that I resolved to do with my life is never say no. If someone wants to sincerely understand what the practice is like, I said I would be glad to help young people, especially young people, but anyone. And the book is partly from that. That is the sincere desire to help people understand, in this case, how do you practice? There are lots of books about design. There are lots of books that celebrate star architects and well-known designers. There are few or none that talk about how do you actually practice? How do you make an architecture firm work? And I had to learn these lessons myself because you don't learn them in school. You learn about design, you learn about the technical side of architecture, you learn about history. You don't really learn about the practice. I think I had in my 5-year undergraduate curriculum one session for a half a year, one semester, on the practice of architecture, taught by a professor that never practiced. And he didn't actually know how to practice. So I had to learn this at HOK. Fortunately, there were some really smart people that preceded me. I had some good mentors, but I'm blessed with a good memory and I could remember things well. And I got lots of encouragement from some of my colleagues who we were constantly, when HOK people would meet, and again, by this time we had multiple offices scattered around the country and then the world. Someone would always start telling what we called HOK stories, stories about the founder, stories about how we won some major project, stories about how we solved a crisis. And someone would always say, these are great stories. Somebody should write these down. Well, nobody did.
You're right.
And until I stepped down from HOK after exactly 50 years in one firm. That's a remarkable thing, I know. So I grew up inside of HOK as HOK was growing up from one office in St. Louis, Missouri, to this global practice that the firm enjoyed and still does enjoy to this day. So it's a good story, and it's a practical book for those who are interested. How do I practice? How do I make things work? And I made it with the questions at the end of each chapter, or the learning points, just so people like you and your audience could understand this. So I'm thrilled that you're asking the questions and you have an audience of people who are interested in this part of architecture.
Awesome. Well, let's dive in. So for people who don't know, I'm probably just going to read excerpts and then ask a question or have Patrick expand on them. The first one I want to go to is talking about bonuses. And a lot of people understand bonus as, a quantitative measure, but you talked about a qualitative measure, right? So from the quote, the discussions were earnest, difficult, sometimes even heated. Eventually, we created a second bonus pool for about 80 offices and market practice leaders that was separate from the office-based bonus pools, something other firms could adopt. The XCOM awarded bonuses from the separate pool to each individual leader by considering profit, but also looking at qualitative metrics such as support for great design, collaboration with other offices, and client services. So my question to you is, how should it's qualitative, so not quantitative. So my question almost can't be answered. How do you figure that out?
Right, right. That's a great question. So we started out as purely quantitative. It was just something our accountants could do. If we made a profit of $1 million and your office contributed 10% of the profit, then you got 10% of the bonus pool. And that sounds fair, and it sounds it's certainly easy to do, but it's lacking any incentives. The only incentive that's there is profit. So what happens when you have just profit as your incentive? You sacrifice client service. Maybe you cut a corner on a job just to make a more profit. You even time your reporting so that the reporting for this year has you making a nice big profit, and maybe next year will take care of itself, or maybe next year you won't have much profit, but you want to make sure you get into the bonus pool in a big way. We saw all these things and realized that we were not incentivizing the behavior that we aspired to have inside the firm. Things like service to a client. Maybe you had a young person or a good leader in an office that had a very difficult, challenging client or a challenging project, and just breaking even would be a grand success. Maybe you had an office that was pioneering a project type that you hadn't done before. And you don't want to really make a big profit. You want to learn how to design something. And so we began to think about these as judgment calls. And we did it a special way. You mentioned design. Yes, good design. You also mentioned client service. The other one I would put in there is technical, as close to technical perfection as you could get. So technically accurate, good project. And so we would have, the XCOM was usually 5 people. We would have some help from our HR departments, and we would actually rank the people in the 80 or so firm-wide leaders. You were leader of an office, leader of design for an office, or leader of what we called our market businesses, which is people that became specialized in designing healthcare facilities or airports or stadiums, et cetera. And we began to cross compare. And we knew that we only had a pot of so much money. And so usually if we had a bonus pool, everybody got a bonus of some kind that was in the leader group. But some people got 2 or 3 times more than others based on behavior. And it took a lot of work for us to do it. We would first rank them on a whiteboard, and then we would cross compare. So we rank people from top to bottom in our leader group, and then we would cross compare. How about this designer versus that designer? And we would make adjustments based on, well, we had him ranked higher, but actually they're closer together than that, et cetera. So we would spend we would go on retreat as an XCOM, meet in some nice place away from all the offices, and take basically a day to do this, sleep on it overnight. Well, go out and have a nice dinner. All the ruffled feathers that happened during the day got put back in place with a nice bonding dinner, including nice wine or something to drink. And the next morning, after sleeping on our decisions, we'd come back and look at it again. We'd make a final adjustment.
How many people were on making the decisions, and were some of those people on the board? Meaning like on the board of deciding their bonuses, or were they all separate?
The XCOM, which we call the executive committee, that's a fancy title, so we call it XCOM, usually is 5 people at HOK. The board of directors is 30 people. All the leaders of big offices, all the leaders of market-based businesses, and some corporate employees like our CFO and our head of IT and so on. And out of those 30, the XCOM are part of that board.
Yep.
But we are designated as executives in the board. So we have in effect, a small board within the large board.
Yep. So 5 people were making that decision
5
on those
were,
8.
yes.
Yep.
That's a nice number, 5, fingers of one hand. If you get more than that, you begin to lose the effective, the cohesion of the small group. The big board of 30 was made, this is another lesson actually. This applies more to big firms than smaller ones like yourselves, but you need to give people a seat at the table, especially up and coming people. So we expanded our board from, in the old days, it was 12 to 30 to reflect the growth of the firm. And every large office had a board member. Sometimes it was the managing principal, sometimes it was the design principal. Sometimes it was the technical principal. All the market businesses had a board member representing them. But the XCOM really ran the firm day to day. And it was our job to bonus the top performers in the company, the leaders. We also gave those leaders a pot of money for their own offices or their own group. So we would tell them their bonuses, and then they would assign the bonuses to their office or their staff. We would review that, again, making sure that it was fair, and in particular, fair in the sense that if somebody did a great job managing a difficult client or a difficult project, maybe didn't make a lot of money, but they maybe saved the firm's bacon, they got a bonus too. So it is a judgment call all the way up and down. The mathematical side of it really at HOK finally became the CFO and I would sit down. We'd look at the profit for the year. We'd look at the cash on hand and the cash collected, and we'd come up with an overall bonus pool. And then we would divide that bonus pool into pieces. The XCOM got a piece, and I got to pick what the bonus was for the XCOM.
Nice.
The XCOM picked the firm-wide leaders, and we did their bonuses, and the firm-wide leaders got to set the bonuses for everybody else. If we had a really good year in a good office, everybody, including the person that made the coffee, would get a bonus.
That's awesome.
In a not as good year, as much of the professional staff as we could got a bonus.
That's great. I love the insight. Going to a more technical question, because you mentioned, especially back 10, 20, 30 years ago,
Yep.
you had different offices in different cities, and some would be profitable, some weren't be profitable, and over time you fix that. The
Yep.
technical question, though, is did all of the finances of all of those roll up into one bank account so that there was one payroll, one, meaning if firms are expanding, and then obviously you can track profitability and stuff like that just by QuickBooks and
Yeah.
tracking your hours. Is
Yeah.
that how it's done, or was it more complicated than that?
No, that's exactly how it was done. One purse strings, one bank account. Um, we did have accountants in the different offices, but they were there for project accounting to work with the project managers, and they were there for billing. Some firms have centralized billing, but we always had the billing done in the individual offices. So the people in that office, the project manager, the principal for the project would actually be responsible for billing and collecting the fees from their clients. But the money once collected was consolidated in one bank account. We had one banking relationship and one very big checkbook, if you will, plus a bunch of savings, strategic cash. And so, yes, that avoids a lot of prickly problems. If you're in an office that's a single office and you expand to a branch, my encouragement is stick together, keep your firm together financially, keep it together in terms of the support. Your IT needs to be together. Your HR needs to be together. Your um, uh, how you work needs to be one insurance policy, a liability insurance for everybody, etc. is a whole lot simpler because individual offices don't need to worry about all that stuff. That can be done centrally, and individual offices can focus on winning work, serving clients, doing a great job.
Yeah, I love it. Um, One of your advice was, and I know things change, and that was great seeing the evolution in the different strategies that
Yeah.
changed over time. And one would say that that's lessons learned, but also different strategies might be appropriate at different levels
Yes.
of a
Yes.
firm. So I don't have a page number for this, but one of your advice was to have the firm save up to buy out one of the leaders.
Yeah.
And my two questions for that is one is, would you just put that in a index fund? And then the second question is, let's say that the firm does that, and then let's just pretend one of the principals leaves. Let's say there's two, three, it doesn't matter. It's the firm's money. Now, does the firm own that portion of the stock? And does that get, what happens there?
Okay. Okay. Yeah, you've got actually a bunch of questions in one. Um, Many firms are acting as partnerships instead of stockholding companies.
Sure.
And one of I think the wisdom of especially the leading founder, George Helmuth, was to set it up as a proper business with stock, shareholders and stock instead of partners and partners share. So HOK was and from the very beginning a stockholding company. What is that? And it's private. This is not money that or stock that's bought and sold on a stock exchange somewhere. It's a privately held company owned by shareholders. And the rules were and still are you can't own stock in HOK unless you're an active employee. So if you die, retire, or get canned, your stock, if you own any, must be bought back by the company, by the treasury. So you get that money or your heirs get it. You can't leave HOK stock to your spouse or your children or your favorite uncle or something. We wanted HOK to be owned and operated by active employees. So when the founders retired, and their little rule was they had to retire at age 70. They had to sell their stock back, even if they wanted to continue to work at the firm. They were no longer shareholders. So the company had to have the cash to buy them out. And in the early days, with the founders owning most of the company, that was a big challenge for the company. That's the biggest challenge of leadership succession, I think, for most companies. And
That's
most
why I think
firms,
it's important, even for smaller firms, to think
yeah,
about that right now.
yeah, it's a typical thing is firms come into existence because of one person, maybe two people forming a partnership, and then they go out of existence when those people decide to retire because they can't figure out how to sell the firm to their employees. Maybe if it's a good firm, they can sell it to a larger firm with cash, but that's an iffy proposition. So how do you do this? Well, first you treat it exactly as a business. You don't give away stock to up and coming employees; they must buy it. When I was offered stock the very first time, I had no money. I was still paying off college debts and trying to start a family and so on. So HOK arranged for the first group of stockholders outside the founders, outside the three, HO and K, they arranged an automatic bank loan for us with our bank at the time. Originally, back in the day, it was Boatman's Bank of St. Louis. And I got an automatic loan from Boatman's. I had to sign some paperwork. And every 2 weeks when I got paid, a chunk of my paycheck went to pay off that loan. And in, I think, 3 years, I had that loan paid off and I owned the stock. So you treat the stock not as something to be given away, but as something to be bought, just like you would if you were buying Tesla stock
Yep.
or stock in Google or any other company. The second thing is, yes, it absolutely requires the company to make money. You need to have cash in order to think about your own life. You need to have cash to do anything. Maybe you can borrow some money to buy a house or something like that, or to go to college, but you still have to pay it back. So making money, making a profit, and having the discipline not to spend it all, but to invest it for the future of the firm is a discipline that the founders instilled. We lost that discipline after the founders were gone. And when I became CEO, we not only didn't have any cash, by then we were 15 offices or so scattered around, including some international. We weren't making money, and we were maxed out on our bank line of credit. So we had no cash. And it was a difficult several years to get the firm back to making profits and paying the bank off. After a couple of months as CEO, we began to pay off the bank. And once we had the bank paid off, we continued to make payments into the bank to build up a reserve fund. So it's just a matter, it's just like you should do at home with your own family or your own personal finances. You should be saving some money every time you get a paycheck and putting it aside for that new house, that college education, for the children you want to have, whatever it is. And HOK, under my leadership, reestablished that virtue of having cash. And you need to be clever enough to say, George over there is going to retire in a few years, and he has $100,000 of HOK stock. We need to have that money ready when George retires. The firm did and still does have a clause in the stock ownership that the firm doesn't have to pay the entire amount in one shot. I think we had 8 years to pay it off with interest. So when the founders retired, that's what we did. Each one owned a third of the firm initially. So when the founders retired, we had 8 years to pay off that third of the firm for each one. And it was tough. We ended up with the last retirement of Gio Obata, who was the youngest. We took the 8 years, but we still didn't have it all paid off. So we ended up getting an investor in the firm.
Yep.
And that led to some other complications down the road if you read the book.
Yeah. So if though the firm is buying those back,
Yeah.
now the founders have the money, but the firm has the stock, not a
Right.
person. How
Right.
does that work?
Uh,
Meaning, in a big enough pie, I feel like it works that then the just it's sort of actually I'll let you talk. Like,
yeah.
there's the firm owns it. What does that mean?
Right. Sure. Let's say the firm retires the stock. Uh, the firm trades some of the treasury of the firm for the shares. They retire the shares. So let's say you and I, Alex, were in business. We had 50 shares each.
Yep.
And I retired since I'm older than you, and you had to buy out my 50 shares. By then, we had made some money in the firm, and the firm was able to buy my 50 shares out. So now the firm, instead of having 100 shares, it only has 50. But it
That's the
also has,
answer that like people like me don't know. Like, oh, we
it,
can retire shares.
that's right. You can retire shares, and then you issue new shares when you have that new crop of leaders coming up that you want to have participate in the ownership of the firm. HOK with roughly 2,000 employees had, when I stepped down, about 350 shareholders. So not just the owners, not just the top XCOM, but a very broad ownership. Uh, and ownership, it's amazing what happens when people have stock, that they become owners. They pay more attention to what's going on. They're more careful with how they spend money. They're more careful about looking out for the long-term benefit of the firm. And one other little, if I can tell you one other little really good story. Um, People, when we would introduce stock to them, say, well, it's a good thing you could buy this, you could be an owner of the firm. They would ask, why should I do that with my own hard-earned money? Why shouldn't I go buy stock in the stock market?
Yep.
So we began to compare HOK stock growth with the Fortune 500, which is a common measurement of the biggest 500 companies on the stock exchanges, both the NASDAQ and the New York Stock Exchange. And HOK stock growth has over the years beat the pants off of the Fortune 500 in terms of growth. Now, why is that? How can we possibly have stock growth like that? I mean, are we wizards or something? No, we're not. It has to do with how much of you have to make a profit,
Yep.
and it has to do with how much of your profit you retain. Stock growth has to do, and again, we could spend an hour on this. Stock growth is a measurement of what the net worth of the company is. Um, if I have a company and you and I are partners in it, or are shareholders, 50-50, and it's worth $100, and we make another $100, the value of the company is doubled. So you divide the net worth of the company, the $200, by we have 50 shares each, our shares just doubled in value.
Yep. And
So as long as you have the discipline to make some profit and to retain part of it into the company, uh, then your stock will grow. And so we were able to prove to ourselves and to our employees, and this comparison with the S&P 500 has been going on now 25 years, and we continue to beat the pants off the S&P 500. And again, think about this. All you have to do is have some discipline to make sure that you make some profit and you keep part of it. If you keep even a penny, your stock will grow. It won't grow much, but it'll grow.
yep.
So having the discipline to make money, I think, is the best thing that a firm can do to take care of its people. It
And
really bothers me that so many architects are living by the seat of their pants. They don't understand finances. They don't understand money. And as a result, they expect that their employees will stick around and be happy and content. But these are young people that are, again, trying to start their lives and start families and buy that first house and so on. And people don't like it too much if you don't have money.
yeah,
You
yeah.
can't pay them. Uh, so in my 50 years at HOK, I never had a paycheck that was delayed or stopped because of lack of funds. And the stock, generally speaking, always grew. So that first stock that I bought as a young architect at HOK had grown multiple times over by the time when I stepped down in 2017, I sold my stock back to the company and made a lot of money to the point where I don't need to work.
Yep.
And isn't that the goal? Worked really hard for 50 years, earned a good living, and now have absolute worry-free retirement. No worries about money.
Absolutely. That is. And I want to dive into that deeper, but
Yep.
before I want to circle back.
Yep.
And where I want to circle back is because you said one of the biggest, hardest things, and this relates to what you just said about architects not understanding the business and thus not being where they could be or should be.
Yep.
If you have a small firm, let's just do me and you, but let's
Yep.
say we have 7 staff, 8, it doesn't matter. It could be 20 staff,
Right.
but it's just 2 leaders. And if we were smart and we put money and both of us retired,
Right.
it's an issue. And this is a question. If we both retire at the same time and just use the cash that we saved up, unless the key to transition is that the employees, some of the leadership would have had to buy up,
Right.
or else you're just giving them a free ride at the end because then like either you just hand it to them, right? Isn't that the other part of the equation is that you need to start working, let's just say a decade in advance to make sure that they have their hand in the honey pot.
Yep.
Because that first strategy of just having enough money only just covers your butt.
Yes.
It
Yes.
doesn't solve the handoff equation fully.
Yeah. I mean, exactly. You spend a lifetime building your firm, decades, and you don't start thinking about selling out in the last year or two. If you do, it's too late.
Yep.
The founders at HOK started selling stock to employees like me. I joined the firm when it was 12 years old in St. Louis, Missouri. And by the time I was 15 years old, I got my first opportunity to buy HOK stock. So they were selling the stock to me um, a couple of decades before the first one of them had to retire. And that's long-term thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And so you could say my first stock purchase was helping to put the money aside to buy out George Helmuth, who was the oldest founder. And again, we still had trouble doing it with 3 founders, even though the firm had grown. Well, because along the way, we kind of lost track of how to make money. But once we rediscovered that, and making money is a discipline, it's it's something that leaders should do. Let me just tell you, you've heard of the Medicis. Medicis, the famous, um, we think of them as patrons of the art. They gave Michelangelo a studio and had him do beautiful
Oh,
sculpture for them back in Florence in the
and then
day.
I pronounce it, I could be pronouncing it wrong. Medici's.
Okay,
Same.
well, you sound more Italian than I do.
Okay.
I'm Irish. What do I know?
Yeah. Either
So
way, so the people will get
yeah,
whatever way they hear it.
so what they did is they had a talented designer, Michelangelo, and they were able to give him the money and the studio and the helpers and the beautiful Carrara marble to work with, so he could be a happy camper, a happy sculptor, and do beautiful work. And I think of the firm, if you're a firm owner, whether it's you and 1 employee or you and 1,000 employees, you should be like the patron, taking care of your people. You know why? Because if you do and you treat them right, they will take care of your clients.
Yep.
So the firm's owners need to be patrons like the Medici or the Medici family.
Yep.
The same way, it's the same idea. Young people who know something about design or architecture or the technical side of the practice, or maybe they're IT experts, whatever it is, including the people that serve the coffee, they're depending on the firm to take care of them. So they do what you ask them to do to take care of ultimately your clients. And that's as simple as that.
Yep. I love it. Let's then go back to where we left off about stock and price and all that.
Yep.
So let's say we're not going to retire yet. We still got some life in us, but we're going to retire in 10 to 20 years.
Yep.
And we do the evaluation, and I'm gonna ask a series of questions because I don't want to blindside you, and
Yep.
then come back to the original. So our firm is based off of HOK because that's what we learned from me and
Okay.
you. HOK asset minus HOK liabilities equal HOK network divided by the shares.
Right.
So the question will be, and then I'll keep talking. The question will be, there's another person that we know, hey, they're going to come and they're going to replace Patrick. Patrick's going to be gone in 5 to 10 years. He's going to retire. And we evaluate based on that, and that person starts buying in. Is it literally your stock that's
No.
being transferred? And I'll leave it there. I won't go any further. Okay.
Okay. No, it's not literally my stock because my stock I own. I own it until I retire and then I sell it. So it's again, let me give the example that you and I are partners
Yep.
and we have 100 shares in the company, 50 each. So somebody needs to buy me out with cash. The company needs to, but not the other employees. So now we have young Susie.
Yep.
That's a up and coming person that we think could replace me. And I've got 10 to 20 years or something. We offer Susie some stock. We each have 50. So we say, Susie, we want you to become a junior partner, but in order to do that, you need to buy some HOK stock, 5 shares, 1/10 of my value. Well, that's a lot of money for Susie.
Yep.
So we say, Susie, you need to buy this out within 3 years. It's an option to buy. And we'll help you because the firm will be profitable. We'll give you some good salary plus a bonus. And if we do this properly, the bonus should be enough for you to make your payment to buy a chunk of that stock each year until you bought your 5 shares. And Susie says, well, that's great because and we say to Susie, and if we do this properly, it won't just be, here's $100 bonus and you have to spend the 100 on the stock. Here's $1,000 bonus and you have to spend 500 on the stock. You keep 500 for yourself. So it needs to be something for everybody.
Yep.
But now Susie buys that stock. So instead of 100 shares, now we've got 105 shares. Well, what happened to the value of the stock? She buys the stock at the current price. So let's say 5 shares are worth $5. Let's keep it nice and simple.
Yep.
Susie gives us $5. We got 5 more shares. The stock value hasn't changed. There's now 105 shares, and we've got $105 in our kitty. Stock hasn't gone down. The buying and the selling of the stock doesn't affect the price. The price is only affected by the firm's profits at the end of each year. Think about that again. So Susie buys another 5 shares. Pretty soon she's bought 20 shares. Those 20 shares that she bought are in our treasury. That money is going to be used to pay me out when I leave.
It's just accumulating.
It's accumulating, sure. And when I leave, my 50 shares goes to 0 shares, but my $50 worth of money also goes out of the treasury. So when somebody retires or buys in or sells out, the stock doesn't go up or down at all.
So essentially it could be then, obviously there's a lot of circumstances, but Susie, let's just pretend in 10 years, she's had enough and she's accumulated half of your stock. But the firm, let's just say, put into a separate fund and paid the other half and retired those. Would that be a scenario as well?
Sure. I mean, this isn't even Steven. I might retire before Susie's bought all of my share, bought the equivalent of my share.
Yes.
So the firm, and the other thing that goes on, Alex, is each year that Susie gets a bonus, the firm keeps some of the profits that year and the stock goes up, grows in value, keeps growing. Remember the S&P 500 and HOK stock.
And
So
you're
you want
putting
your
that
stock.
into some sort of account or in a couple different accounts, just
Yes.
like a retirement account.
No, we call it a strategic cash account in HOK parlance. And what do we use that for? Well, we use it because we decide we need a new computer system because our old one is outmoded. Or there's another firm. No, there's a talented person we want. It'll cost us $100,000 bonus to get that person to join us. Or there's another firm. Or we want to put everybody through Revit school and there's an investment.
Yep. But you want to keep growing that, let's say 100,000 in a bank, the next year 110, the next year
Yes,
112, I
yes,
mean
yes,
20, whatever.
yes. You want to grow your stock value and you want to grow your cash. And cash is a wondrous thing. It is the most liberating thing for a firm because it means you're not under somebody else's thumb. You can decide, hey, you know what? This year, we're going to invest in ourselves. We're going to make no profit because we have enough cash. We're going to all learn how to coordinate better documents, or we're all going to learn how to do hospital design or something. Or we're going to look for that other firm in the nearby town that we've always wanted to have an office in. So wondrous good things can happen besides buying out founders. And HOK grew and continues to grow by that method, by finding talented people or other firms. And so that's part of the growth story of the firm. We wanted to get into hospitality design. Hospitality, hotels and conference centers and so on. And there was a specialized firm in New York City, and they were in financial trouble. Why? Because the founders wanted to retire and there was no money. That sounds like a familiar story.
Yes.
So we provided the money. We bought out the founders and we got the firm. And
This became HOK Sports in the,
no, it became HOK Hospitality.
oh, hospitality. Okay.
HOK Sport is another story,
Yep.
but it's the same idea.
Okay. So let me ask my complicated question now. Okay.
Go for it.
We just talked about the valuation, and here's the different parts of all of this. When you're looking at another firm to buy, because that's what we're talking about,
Right.
how do you value their price? And this is the two-parter because sometimes it's, let's just say EBITDA, and it's a multiple of that because some people might want to value that way. Uh, Firms on the stock market. So let's say you buy IBM and it goes up 2% a year. HOK could obviously go up 5% a year, 7% a year, and you could buy it. But the thing about that IBM stock is that their price, and maybe IBM's not a great example, but it doesn't matter, might be a multiple of their EBITDA.
Right.
So circling all the way back, in theory, I'm sure you've already accounted for this not to do it, but HOK, if it's valued the way it is, if someone bought all the stock or had enough and could take it from private to public, they could then go like a 7% EBITDA
Right.
and just kind of suck out all that money. And now, you would still grow at your 2 or 3% a year.
Right.
But how you are valuing HOK, is that different than how you're valuing these firms that you're talking about? Is it that multiple?
Yeah, I understand your question.
Perfect.
I understand your question. And I wonder how many of your listeners understand EBITDA.
Go ahead.
We don't actually use EBITDA to value our firm or other firms.
Yep.
And EBITDA is a nice accounting term that basically is a reflection of how much how much earning power a firm has.
Yep.
And the way HOK has always valued ourselves and any potential other firm to purchase is by what is a very simple called book valuation.
Okay.
That's an accountant's term. It means and you read it to me just before, what are the assets of the firm? How much money do we have in the bank or in a savings account? How much money do we have? What's the value of all of our furniture and computers and stuff like that? And then that's the assets. What are our liabilities? Well, we owe some money to a bank, or we have to pay our employees, and so on. Assets minus liabilities equals net worth. It's a very simple and extremely conservative valuation. And so it's very simple to find out what our value is. Any accountant can make that calculation for you or for me or for your firm or mine. It's the one that I would encourage if you have your own household. Alex, you and your family, you've got personal money, you've got some assets, maybe you got a car and you got some furniture and maybe you got a savings account and you also have a house, but you got a mortgage and maybe a car loan or whatever. Assets minus liabilities, that's what you're worth today. It's not having to do with your earnings power. It's just if you died today or disappeared, took a trip to Tahiti and never came back, let's say, and somebody had to dispose of your estate, that's what they would do. They would sell off your assets, pay off your liabilities, and what's left is your net worth. And HOK values itself that way. It's extremely conservative. If you're comparing HOK to IBM or Tesla, Tesla is selling at multiple times earnings because people think it's a growing company and they're going to conquer the world. They might be right, they might be wrong. I can remember you mentioned IBM. There was a time when IBM was like Tesla. Not today.
And that's kind of why I bring it up, because IBM's kind of like, it was that, and now it's just, it's just IBM.
Yes, just it's still a great company, but it's not one of the darlings. So HOK has been conservative in valuing ourselves with book valuation instead of by multiples of earnings. And when we find a firm to buy, that's the first question they always ask. What are we worth? Well, give me an accountant with half a day and we'll tell you. And it's assets minus liabilities equals net worth. And sometimes when we do that, they say, well, we know we're worth much more because we have Joe, our superstar designer, who is able to convince clients across the globe that he's the best God's gift to design or something like that. Or we have somebody that's expert in a building type, healthcare design, whatever. And that's if you go more than book value, then you're paying something called goodwill. That is, if everybody went away today, including that talented designer, but you know what? You can buy a firm, but you can't buy people. Slavery was outlawed in 1865. So if you buy a firm and that talent that you thought you were getting disappears, there's nothing you can do. You can attempt to have contracts with these talented people that cause them to stay around for a while. But if somebody needs a contract to stick around, they're not going to be a loyal, hard-fighting employee to make the firm shine. They're going to be looking out at the exit and plotting their next move. So we're very conservative when we value ourselves or when we value other firms. We have paid what we call goodwill, which is more than book value, occasionally for some good reason, but not too much. Because when we do that, guess what happens? If we buy a firm, let's say you and we're partners again. We got a firm worth $1,000, and we buy another firm that's worth $1,000. Okay, now we're going to have a bigger firm worth $2,000. That's good, but then they say, well, we really want you to pay us $500 extra because we're so talented, and we say, okay. Now we've got two firms that are worth $2,000, but wait a minute, we paid $2,500, so we've just lost the value of our stock. So goodwill counts against stock value. And stock value to us ranks right up there at the top in terms of we don't like our stock value to go down for reasons like that. So it's a complicated thing, but at its core, it's simple. You want to value, if you're buying another firm, you want to value them as you value yourself.
Would you say then that, because I've been under a different assumption that architecture are firms, engineering firms, doesn't matter, are a multiple of profit, where when brass tacks is, if it's HOK is looking, it's book value plus, a little bit of goodwill based on that.
Yeah,
that's more the hard reality of it.
Yes. And if you find those firms that say, look, you've offered us $1,000, but we think we're $2,000, Well, fine. If you're worth 2,000, go out and find somebody else to buy your firm. And there's usually some reflection on that. And the other secret about buying another firm isn't the money. That's the easy part. The difficult part is, are we compatible culturally?
Mm.
Do we have the same values? Do we have the same desire for client service? Do we treat each other inside the firm with respect and trust? Do we work harmoniously together, or are we fighting like cats and dogs? And then there's a technical side. We use Revit and they use Graphics
AutoCAD. Yeah.
or
But
something. Um, uh, so we like to find firms that are compatible with us culturally, because if we spend money to buy another firm and they're not culturally compatible, it will not work.
gotcha.
And we've had experience with that.
That's good advice. I want to pivot to an extremely technical question. Not technical. It's actually a favorite question. And you can say no, Patrick. You talked about in page 139, if I could ever get to it, basically how you wanted to capture information so that it wasn't lost. And you began experimenting using Microsoft Excel for meeting
Yeah.
notes and everything else you did.
Yeah.
It accommodated everything you need: text, graphics, charts, numbers, images, and it created different sheets and tabs with accesses. And it may sound geeky, but it was one single workbook. Would you mind either talking about that more, or share, or making a blank one without information about projects, and either send, I could share it to the audience, you could have it somewhere. I know it's really like it's a small thing, but I
Yeah.
feel like some people, the advice that they need is, hey, start from here,
Right.
you know,
Uh,
and
yeah,
then
I stumbled into Excel for a really simple reason. Well, first of all, our offices are all Microsoft based. We're not Mac based, and there's a simple reason for that. Is because all the big then CAD software and now BIM software runs better on Windows instead of on Macs. And so we standardize on Microsoft, and Microsoft has a bunch of products. We all know them: PowerPoint, Excel, Word, and some other things. But basically, I found that Excel was a marvelous tool for me. It was a marvelous organizing tool. Why? Well, because I could treat it like a Word document and type, and I could type sentences, and that was it. It was fine with that. I could also add up columns of numbers, which is what it was originally made for. I could also insert scans of things or photographs, and the photographs either slide around on the surface of the Excel, or you can command them to put themselves into a particular cell. So it was really handy, and Excel has tabs like separate pages. You can have a whole workbook built around a project or built around a major task that you're doing. I started running XCOM meetings with Excel workbooks, and I would have to-do lists as one of the tabs, and I would have the agenda on another tab. And my partners hated the to-do list because every week on Monday morning, I would go to the to-do list when we were having our Monday morning meetings and say, Bill, have you gotten this accomplished? Task number 3. And they didn't like that. So it basically meant that it was such an irritation to them that they started actually completing their tasks instead of just talking about it. So taking each other seriously. So I've used it throughout my life at HOK. Once I discovered what it was, I use it to this day to organize myself personally. It is a marvelous personal organization tool. My wife uses it for her business and her projects. Each project is an Excel book with tabs. Um, what it won't do is it's not the same as having a database that you can share among a big group if you've got a major project. It's more of a personal organizing tool, although it's certainly fully shareable.
yeah,
Can I send you something? Yes, I can do that, Alex.
that would be
I
great.
just I'll find something that's suitable and send it to you. It also, because you can manipulate the grid on Excel, you can actually use it to draw things, simple diagrams,
Yeah,
and you can import shapes and so on. So I've done uh, all kinds of on the fly without getting into a CAD or a BIM software. I've done all kinds of things that are graphically helpful and allow me to continue working,
absolutely.
all within Excel.
I appreciate it. Thank you. We're coming up on an hour. Do you have more? Can we extend?
I actually have a bunch of stuff stacked up. I've got meetings. I've got interviews of my own. I'm
Okay.
interviewing people for my next book, and I could come back to you another time, perhaps,
Well, again,
because this is
I'll
really
wrap up with
interesting.
one. Yeah, I'll wrap up with one question, and we'll leave the other questions for later. Okay.
All right.
So one of the funny things that me and my business partner, because we both read it,
Yeah.
I loved it because I told him that he needed to go to charm school.
Yeah.
So, and he accepted. And then weeks later, he said, he goes, I think you need to go to Kurt school and be a little bit more Kurt. Meaning sometimes, so his question to you, and then I have a follow-up question because sometimes clients, if you I've seen this with people trying to break up and they're just not telling them like why they're breaking up, and it's just this huge argument, right? So can you list some positives of the curtness that you used to have and what maybe you've retained? Um, and then
Sure.
also what was the difference when you after you went to charm school and all that?
Okay. All right. That's a good question. I haven't had that question in a very long time. Um, yes, I was viewed as abrupt, I
Yeah,
would say. Um, and as I evolved in HOK from a designer, they found that I had project management ability, so they eventually I became a project manager, and I have a pretty clear picture of what I think we should do to organize projects. So I was abrupt with people, and I kept getting counseling about it. And eventually, I was told. By then, I was a firm-wide person. I was told if you might be the CEO someday, but you got to knock off the rough edges. So they got me a personal coach. I did go to what I called charm school. A lot of funny stories about it. Um, One of the stories that I'll just share with you, it's in the book, um, is after the first day of charm school, one of the questions that I was because I didn't quite believe I was abrupt.
sure.
They said, go home and ask a family member or a good friend if you're bullheaded, because bullheaded is another way of saying it. So I went home determined to do that. The first person I saw was my young daughter, who was about 10. And I said, Elizabeth, do you think of me as bullheaded? And Elizabeth is no slouch when it comes to quick thinking. Why, no, Daddy, I think of you as bald headed. And I cracked up, and it was all I needed because she was telling me, without actually offending me, that yes, you have some rough edges that need to be shaved down. So I got a great deal out of my what I called charm school, and what it did is it gave me one good lesson, which is if I think I know what to do, I know that you and I are going to run this firm and we're going to sell some stock and we're going to do this, and I have to convince you. I have the idea of it. I have to bring you along. I can't just tell you, Alex, this is the way it is, and by damn, we're going to do it. I have to sit down with you or with the other people in our firm and explain everything and have you come to the same conclusion. It might take more time, but at the end of the day, if you're if you have the chance to think about things and ask questions uh, and come to the same conclusion, then we'll really be aligned. And if you don't, if you have still some differences of view, I need to listen because maybe I don't have it all figured out after all. So I found that it was extremely helpful to have charm school for my CEO job, but a lot of my CEO job required abruptness. It required this is what we have to do because we're out of time. We have to start paying the bank off. we have to dismiss such and so leader in such and so office because he or she is tearing that office apart with behavior, whatever it is. So you have to have both, but you don't have to be a jerk.
Gotcha.
You can do it. If you know where you want to go, take the time and believe enough in your partners to bring people along. Don't just tell them what to do. Then you become like a little Hitler or a little dictator. That's not going to get anywhere.
Amazing. Thanks for the advice. I will follow back with you. We will continue in a couple months and get to the other questions. I
Okay.
appreciate your time. If you want to leave the audience with anything, go ahead. If not, thank you for being inside the firm.
Okay. Well, I think I probably talked way too much today anyway. So thank you for having me. I hope that people got something from this, and you've been a great host. It's been a great pleasure talking to you and through you to your audience.